my friends and in the group.
Welcome everybody to London Futurists, our hangout on air on the subject of technological resurrection. My name is David Wood. I'm chair of London Futurists, and today we are joined by a number of different panelists who each have their own perspective on the subject of resurrection. So what we do in London Futurist is look at scenarios about the future, things that may happen, and then we think, what's the implications of these scenarios for the present? Should we do things differently today as a result of thinking about some of these future scenarios? If there's something we like about a future scenario, can we do something today to increase the likelihood of that happening? If there's something we don't like about a future scenario, is there something we can do to lessen the probability of that happening? Or otherwise, should we, in any case, prepare for things that are likely to happen? And the scenario we're looking at is that in the future, our descendants, maybe later versions of ourselves, will be more technologically capable than even we are today. In fact, much more technologically capable. We may be able to do not just traveling in space, but we may perhaps be able to bend space and time in such a way that we can reach back through time, or our descendants may be able to reach back through time, and without destroying space-time loops or any kind of paradox, it may be possible to copy elements of the past into the future. And in particular, it may be possible to copy the consciousness of somebody at the point of their death into the future. So possibly, as somebody is dying, they may be thinking, what's next? Is this the end? Is this oblivion? Might there be some kind of resurrection as they learned about perhaps in their Sunday school as a child? Well, maybe this is a different scenario, that we might be resurrected perhaps by our great-grandchildren or similar, and we will be brought back to life in some marvelous copy of our present body, an enhanced copy, and with our consciousness somehow copied across space and time. So is that a feasible scenario? Is this, well, it sounds like science fiction, but could there be some science fact to it? And let's say open for discussion from the panelists. I'm going to ask each of the panelists now to briefly introduce themselves before we dive in more deeply. And we're going to start with Jonathan. So Jonathan, where are you, and what's your interest in this whole subject?
Hi, my name is Jonathan. I'm a 36-year-old futurist living in Dallas, Texas. And I guess I wrote this book out of frustration a little bit, because as we see this technology like artificial intelligence becoming blatant in our society, every day it's like every company is now an artificial intelligence company. I still see a lot of ideas not being explored. I don't think society is ready for anything that's coming. And this idea of technological resurrection kind of becomes possible when you start looking at quantum entanglement and you hear scientists talking about new models of reality and time. And I think it has some really cool implications that could be explored, because while obviously the science isn't, it's not there, it's not for sure. If you look at any idea of what happens to us after we die, none of them have perfect science. So it's kind of like that quote by Churchill, democracy is the worst form except for all the others. So technological resurrection obviously has a lot of flaws, and we could debate the science, but if you stack it up to the other ideas, I think it's just as imperfectly good, might be the case. And I think that if we did explore it, it has some really interesting and positive implications for society if people even thought it was a possibility.
Many thanks. We're going to come back to many of these questions shortly. Let's move to Budapest, to Giulio Briscoe. If you introduce yourself and give an opening thought.
Thank you very much, David. My name is Giulio Briscoe. Yes, I'm based in Budapest, Hungary, since a few years. I'm Italian myself. This is my wife's country. I have been writing about these kind of things, technological resurrection, and all annexes for quite a long time now. What I want to say is that I was very much impressed when I read Jonathan's book a couple of months ago, because I find it a very simple and very readable first introduction to our ideas. There is much more to say, of course, about technological resurrection. There is much more to say to explore its physical and philosophical and theological aspects. And that's what I'm doing in my writings. But I think what was really missing was a simple book, very clear, also very fun and entertaining to read, something that can be read in a couple of hours, to explain in a nutshell what it is that we are talking about. So I was very much impressed, and thank you very much, Jonathan, for writing the book. And I look forward to hearing more from you and from all the other panelists.
Thanks, Giulio. So we've been in Dallas, Texas. We've been in Budapest, Hungary. Let's move to New York. Katie Metaverse, please introduce yourself and give some opening thoughts.
Yes, thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here. And I think it's very important to have this diverse panel today because there's a very wide gap between what I feel the public believes transhumanism and emerging technologies are doing for the future of humanity versus what's actually happening within the communities of real scientists, futurists, transhumanists, philosophers, the real people who are involved with it versus the fantasy and fear and the fetishization of these communities. So there is a very wide gap. I do have one foot in both worlds, and I look forward to exploring these with you as we go today.
Thanks, Katie. And the final panelist in our round the world trip is in Moscow, Russia, Alexei Turchin.
Hi, my name is Alexei Turchin, and my interest to the human resurrection is also somehow connected with Hungary, because many years ago when I was in school, I was in love with a girl and she died, and I promised myself that I will find a way to resurrect the people, and I have been thinking about this topic on and off, but after the reading of the great book of Jones, I feel obliged to collect all my ideas through the years, and also so I feel very inspired by it to start the discussion about the topic, because now I see that there are many people who are interested in the problem, and I'm not so crazy, and we are together and we could find interesting solutions.
Well, we in London Futurists like to look at futurist topics which are a bit beyond the mainstream futurist interest. We like to look at them and make them hopefully more accessible to a wider audience. We still want to ensure that there's sufficient credibility there. We don't want to just talk about something because it's, quote, cool or awesome. I think there should be some credibility. And on that subject, I mean, Alexei, a couple of quick questions for you. What are you sitting in front of, may I say? I mean, there seems to be a rather incredible chart there.
Yeah, this is my chart of existential risk prevention. And this is my project of creating several futuristic roadmaps, and one of them about the ways to reach immortality, another of them about this one, about global risk prevention, and the new one, which I will show later today, is about resurrection. So I use roadmaps to think about problems.
Perhaps then I can ask you, Alexei, to briefly run through some of your thoughts, which I know you have prepared in a set of screen slides.
So should I start now?
Yes, please do.
Okay, I will turn my application right now. Wait a second. Now I can't find the right application.
Ah, it was there a few minutes ago.
Yeah, that's here. Okay, so so do you,
it's looking good.
So are you seeing my my presentation? Because
yes, it's going live now.
Okay, so after reading of the John's book, I felt inspired to suggest some short classification of different approaches to the technological resurrection. And the main problem you all of us know that is death. And death is the loss of information. There is an idea of information theoretical death, and that is the after which information is not retrievable. But if we will be able to find the way to reconstruct a person based on the information. So if we will be able to create a model of the person, a very close copy, it could be regarded technological resurrection. If we solve personal identity problem, if we could be able to prove that the copy and the original are the same, if the information is the same. But here I will not look into personal identity problem. I will more look on the information retrieval problem. I hope that future superintelligence will be able to solve both problem, personal identity and information. So there are many ways how to reconstruct information about the decreased human mind, but the most important are those which we could prepare now. So are you hearing me? Is it okay?
It's good, thanks.
Okay, so the first one is cryonics, and another new idea is plastination. Plastination is putting human brains into plastic, which preserves all synaptic connections, all structure of the connectome, and even maybe the brain could be sliced, and it could be more reliable than cryonics, but it is less popular if something could be less popular than cryonics anyway. But another option which open to almost everybody is digital immortality, which is recording traces about oneself. So you could make so you can record as much information about yourself as possible, hoping that future superintelligence will be able to reconstruct your personality based on this information. So it will not work without superintelligence, but we could help it by providing as much information as possible. And brain uploading is not available now, so okay, so future superintelligence is what we need, and here I completely agree with Jones that this is a key for our immortality and infinity. But if we look on the superintelligence, we could see that it could be of different levels, which I call Kardashev's levels. The first level is level 3 Kardashev. It's like solar system size, and it could resurrect us based on traces, or implement something like a super archaeology that is searching all information about humanity on Earth. Or you create what I call a resurrection simulation. So it is create all simulation of the history of Earth, which is as close as original, and as a result, we get the very close to the original humans in the moment of your death in this simulation. So I will share this presentation later because I think we don't have much time to go in details, but I would say that even larger superintelligence will have even higher computational capacity to reconstruct people based on even smaller information. Okay, and another idea which described in John's book is idea of quantum archaeology. This is idea that we could use quantum physics to somehow connect these past points in space-time and retrieve information. So it's still, for me, not clear is quantum teleportation will allow us the data transfer from the past, because the Bell equation is not allowing to transfer data, but future superintelligence could solve the problem and extract the data from the past. Also, there could be other solutions based on new laws of physics, if we'll find some time machines, wormholes, parallel worlds, or new world models. If, for example, if we live in a simulation, we could use this simulation interface to find the data it should record. If aliens exist, they also record data about us. So any new law of physics allows us a new way to immortality. Okay, I'll skip the quantum immortality, an idea of the partial resurrection, where we just reconstruct a human partly or not exactly the same. Then idea of transformative resurrection, where a person is not resurrected as a person, but something else, like in theater, in memory of another person, or like an image, or like a foundation. And a lot of human beings, after they died, have a foundation dedicated to them, which continue to work based on the value system. They have archives, they have museums about the person. So it's some form of post-human life available now for some people. So there is a slide about different religious ideas, what I call Transcendental Resurrection. And this is the map I have been spoken in the beginning. So I will share the link on the whole presentation and the map after the event. And I will put here the slide I prepared about history of Russian cosmism, where I want to put attention that Fedorov was the illegal son of the Duke Gagarin. So it started from Gagarin and ended with Gagarin. So it's quite surprising maybe for those who don't know the connection of these people, and that Gagarin, cosmonaut, was great fan of Tsiolkovsky and have been reading him every day, for example. So they're quite closely connected with each other.
And these topics are covered in Jonathan's book.
Yeah, exactly. That is why I become interested. A lot of this you can find in John's book, where he have a chapter about Russian cosmists and how Fedorov, who was a friend of Dostoevsky and Tolstoy, and created the idea of that resurrection of the fathers is needed. And this idea inspired Tsiolkovsky that to overcome overpopulation problem, space colonization is needed, and he created the idea of multi-stage rockets. And this idea inspired Korolev, who was a constructor of the space rockets, and also it inspired Gagarin, who wanted to be cosmonaut even before it was open for applying to be a cosmonaut. So he was sending letters, please take me in the space group, even before it was formed. And so they naturally find each other, and he was selected for the first flight, not randomly, I think so. So it's quite interesting story, but now the problem is that small things they could do now for human resurrection, people are not doing. They are not signing for cryonics. We are not collecting digital data. We are not preserving DNA of deceased people. So that is the main problem I see in the technological resurrection. So that's all I want to say.
Many thanks, Alexei. That's a very useful survey of some of the topics we should look at. Let's get some comments from the panelists on any point which they want to highlight or disagree with or take further based on what they've heard already. Jonathan. You have to come off mute, Jonathan.
Nice.
Is it working now?
Yes, thanks.
Okay. So I wanted to say the idea of reconstructing people in the future, quantum archaeology, I think that I can say 100% positive that's going to happen. I think at some point we're going to be able to do conscious transfer, brain transplants. 100 years from now, that's going to happen.
You're 100% positive, you say, that this is...
Yeah, because it's exponential. So say 100 years from now, if we can't, we'll be able to reconstruct a human, right? And if not 100 years, 200, 300, it'll eventually happen. So I think in my book, what I really wanted to focus on was a new idea, or a different idea, called temporal resurrection. as how it applied to us right now. Because I think that one of the reasons I'm so interested in, futurism, is that I really think that I'm going to get to see this future. And we know if we go outside and we get hit by a bus and we die, it's not going to happen. So in a way, I feel like temporal resurrection could be the ultimate life extension, which of course, you're very interested in. You wrote the book, Abolition of Aging. So I really wanted to focus on that because I felt like, as Alexei said, no one's doing anything as far as like, storing DNA. They're just not excited about this idea. Okay, well, I'll die, but 100 years from now, you'll create basically a clone of me. People don't feel like that's going to be their actual self.
But if people take your idea seriously, they're actually not going to bother recording data about themselves. They're not going to bother cryonically preserving themselves. They're going to think, well, in the future, superintelligence is going to resurrect me by this temporal resurrection. Hence, let's not bother with cryonics. Let's not bother with the other mechanisms. Is that
right?
Good?
I see what you're saying there, but at the same time, it would get people interested in the future, and they would feel like they need to make this future happen. Like, in other words, maybe temporal resurrection is going to happen, but is it going to happen to you specifically? Is the future going to be a place that you want to be resurrected in, right? So that was something that I emphasized in the end of the book. I was like, this is a way to make people care about the future. So right now, if we pass laws that are good for the environment, that are good for the economy, good for people, then if you get hit by a bus tomorrow, you'd wake up in the future and it would be a beautiful environment and people would be good and things like that. So I felt like that was a really exciting idea. And I as Julio said, I wrote the book purposefully for a mass audience. I thought it'd be a good introduction, and I thought this would be an exciting idea. And if we get people excited about futurism, excited about these possibilities, then everything else will come. They'll be into cryonics. They'll be into AI. We'll be able to talk to people about it. We have to get them excited first. So that was kind of the reason I focused so heavily on temporal resurrection.
So let's come to Katie now. And by the way, Katie, maybe you can answer the question of whether you think you're 100% confident that this future will happen. I noticed on YouTube not everybody is convinced that things will be as inevitably good as that.
Well, I do believe that a lot of these technologies will come to fruition, and I think that is a good thing. But however, just like how, let's say, technologies that we thought would be here around 30 or 40 or 50 years ago, even 100 years ago, a lot of the times what we believe they will be like end up becoming much different. So I think that we might have some forms of these technologies, but maybe perhaps not exactly like we're discussing today. I do think that I agree with Jonathan that people need to be a little bit more excited and a little bit more curious about these technologies and how they can help us in the future. A lot of the times when we see what these technologies might be like, it's through science fiction, whether it be Black Mirror or the Philip K. Dick Electric Dreams series that are out. All of these shows are all very dystopian, and they are basically bringing our worst nightmares about these technologies to the forefront of human consciousness and public consciousness. So I think what we need, especially our responsibilities of being futurists and transhumanists in this space, we should be the ones to help present the reality that is most likely to happen and get the word out there about these technologies and really start discussing it with the people in ways that go beyond dystopian fears and things like that. But yes, I do think it will happen. I'm not 100% positive. Nothing is really 100% positive, but I think that even in the last 5 years, there's been a tremendous increase in the amount of startups and real initiatives taken to make these visions a reality.
Well, some progress is credible. It's feasible that we will have driverless cars, and feasible that we may even be able to abolish aging. It's quite another step up to think that there will be beings in the future that can bend space and time and teleport us from the past into the future. I mean,
right.
We're not theoretical physics experts, any of this, but my suspicion is that it's more like a 10% chance that such a thing will be possible rather than a 100% chance. So I might be pleasantly surprised.
Well, can I just add, when I said that I was 100% positive, I was saying that I was 100% positive that we would be able to basically create a person from scratch. You know what I'm saying? We'd be able to, like, you know, technologically recreate somebody. I'm not positive that they'll be able to bend space and time. I was saying that I'm positive that those other technologies will exist. They'll be able to, you know, grow a brain in a vat, clone people, things like that 100 years from now. But yeah, I'm not positive in temporal resurrection. So that's why I was so interested in the idea. I think it's kind of a new idea.
Yeah. Just on what futurists said in the past, I've been looking recently at what FM 2030 said in the 1970s. He's full of optimism about the future. I mean, he decried pessimism. He said, oh, all these people, they're so pessimistic, the left-wing pessimist and the right-wing pessimist. He was advocating this wonderful new thing called upwing technology. And he was very confident that all kinds of things would have happened by 40 years after he'd written, which is now. And in some ways, he would be pleasantly surprised at what we've done. But in other ways, I think he'd be deeply disappointed that other things he had in mind were not yet achieved. Giulio, you've been looking at this field for quite a long time. How confident are you about these future possibilities? And how confident are you that if, sad to say, we were to die within a few years' time, that at some stage in the future we'll be resurrected?
You know, David, I'm not even 100% certain that I'm here talking to you now. I'm not 100% certain of anything. But given how certain I can be on something, I do bet on technological resurrection for a simple reason. Because I consider it as physically possible. And looking at history, I see that when something is physically possible, at a certain point it's done. The engineers always manage to go to the limit and push the limit of what is physically possible. I think these things can be done. And since they can be done, I think sooner or later they will be done. If not by humans, by some other civilization in the universe. The universe is a big place. Things will happen, and wonderful things will happen. Now, as you said, I have been a transhumanist for a very long time. Since since much before I knew of the word transhumanism. But I'm kind of not very typical in a certain sense, because first I have to confess that I don't do any of the wise things that Alexei was recommending. I don't store DNA, I don't keep a mind file, I'm not signed up for cryonics. Well, I used to be signed up for cryonics a few years ago. I gave it up because it was too expensive, as simple as that. And I am 100% sure that all the weird and futuristic things that we like to discuss will be achieved sooner or later. I'm not very optimistic as far as the timeline is concerned. I'm afraid I don't take the over-optimistic predictions of Ray Kurzweil seriously, not at all. I mean, I love what Ray Kurzweil writes, but I just don't believe him when he says that Singularity will be here in 2045 and everything will change from the morning to the evening and all that. I think things like mind uploading will eventually be achieved, but not in the next couple of decades. Perhaps by the end of the century, perhaps even later. I just don't like to make predictions about dates, because as a student of history and of the history of technology, I know that nice mathematical models like, an exponential singularity are very nice, are very mathematically clean, but that's not how things happen in the real world. There are all sorts of roadblocks and steps back and all that. Things eventually are achieved, but usually much slower than we like to think. And so when it comes to technological resurrection, I think it is physically possible. Since it is physically possible, I think sooner or later it will be achieved. But I definitely don't see things like are described in Jonathan's book of a human society in the year 2154, I believe, able to achieve technological resurrection. I think it will take much, much, much longer. Perhaps centuries, perhaps thousands of years, perhaps even longer than that. But one thing I'm certain of is that since it's essentially physically possible, I don't know how, but I can see a lot of hints in today's science, especially physics, that kind of indicates that these weird ideas will become engineering someday. It will happen. 5,000 years, 500,000 years, I don't care. From our point of view, from the point of view of the individual who gets resurrected, just no time will pass.
Thanks.
You are not thinking in the meantime. Okay.
Let's come to Alexei. Alexei, what's your views on the probabilities here?
So my view is that the main problem is not technological, but human values. The people actually have some instruments like cryonics and digital immortality even now, but they don't want to use them. So they don't want the resurrection for some weird reason. And even if we have superintelligence now, but it will be programmed by human voting, human will vote against using it for resurrection for some ethical, religious, or other reasons. So the problem is how to make people more interested in the idea of the technological resurrection. And I would like if others share opinions on this topic.
Well, yes, we will ask that question in a minute, but
yeah,
on the question of values and on the question of aliens, which I had a discussion earlier that maybe even if we humans don't survive into the future, maybe we humans might unfortunately destroy ourselves and we won't have super intelligent descendants. There might be other aliens elsewhere in the universe. I think Julia said the universe was so huge, there's bound to be. And some of them will probably have the capability, if they want, to resurrect people from the past. But why on earth would aliens be interested in resurrecting us?
Okay, but if we look on the infinitely large universe, there should be my copies somewhere, even without aliens. So we come to the idea what is called big world immortality, that everything should repeat in the universe. And we don't know if it was aliens or naturally, but we can't rely on this idea because we, in fact, don't know. Will it work? Is the universe big enough to provide aliens which will resurrect us? And will we be satisfied that we will be resurrected too late in time and not in the way we want? Because it's better to be resurrected earlier and in the same world than by aliens in the unknown world, I think. So what about probability of technological resurrection? I think that there is in fact only two probabilities. Either there will be global catastrophe and everybody will die, or superintelligence will appear and it will resurrect everybody. This is just two stable outcomes of human civilization. So I think we should strive to the best outcome, that is benevolent superintelligence, which will resurrect the dead.
Katie, would you like to come into the conversation? What's your views on what you've just been listening to?
Well, I think the real issue is regarding, going back to the values of technological resurrection. It really comes down to how do you choose, right? Because there's so many people who might be interested in let's say, preserving parts of themselves, whether it be using an app or perhaps supporting startups like the startups I was working on previously, where you would aim to upload your consciousness into a robotic body, or even experiment with these technologies by creating AIs and having them live in a VR world. And for instance, there's even some people who I have spoken to who are working on essentially creating a mind that's in a box, that would be a consciousness that exists in a virtual world. So there's just so many different ways that technological resurrection might be possible in the very near future. The real question is, what are the values, and how do we approach this to the public and get their support, really? I mean, if we're going to go completely out there with some of these topics, it sounds very scary to a lot of people. And I think that people can relate to something like a deceased loved one and having a way to reconnect, even though the loved one had passed away, whether it be through an app, an AI that's very close to, but not an exact digital copy of that person. Little things like that can help us get there in the future. But I think right now we need to kind of focus on those baby steps so we can get there.
And what do you recommend as the most important baby steps?
Well, I think right now, time is a big issue as well. So many of us have a hard time even managing our social media, let alone explore the right type of emerging technologies to invest our time into, that in the future will help us resurrect ourselves or our loved ones and whatnot. So I think that I think it's good to start exploring these things and start experimenting a little bit, whether it be different types of apps. There has been some apps that have come and gone already, but I think that there is a great interest, more of an interest now than ever, now that I've ever seen before, in transhumanism and these technologies. So it is happening. It is definitely already in the process. So I think that we just need to work together and start showing our support for the ones that seem the most likely or most feasible. And this way, people start learning about how it is going to be in the future and start getting used to the idea even first.
And what about these robotic bodies you mentioned? I mean, are these going to happen anytime soon? I remember about 4 or 5 years ago, everybody was very interested in what the Russian Dmitry Itskov was doing with his GF 2045 program to stage by stage enable immortality, as he put it. First of all, by copying our heads onto new bodies, then by copying our brains into robotic bodies, then by copying our minds onto new hardware. And the fourth one was something a bit obscure, I can't quite remember, but we all turned into beings of light or something. Are you seeing any progress towards robotic bodies?
I am seeing progress. I mean, if you even look at what Boston Dynamics has been doing in their Atlas robot, Atlas couldn't even walk on its own until somewhat recently. So there has been a lot of steps to overcome along the way, but I do see a tremendous amount of evolution in terms of robots and what's possible. So I think that once we solve some of these issues where they're more human-like rather than being more robotic-like, and we could start seeing a body that is truly like a synthetic, like something that we've seen on our favorite sci-fi programs, I think that then it will just really kick off and evolve from there. So I think it is going to happen. I'm not sure exactly what the best route is right now for us to be focusing on in terms of being able to upload our minds or consciousness. I think that fourth stage, or I believe it's called Avatar D, in the 2045 initiative. That would be very similar to that holographic or virtual reality metaverse, in a way where you are consciousness in this virtual universe. So I think that is another option as well, but that is very far into the future. I think that it's more likely that there are a lot of very real people who could benefit from a lot of these technologies we're talking about, like the robotic bodies, or eventually being able to upload our consciousness into them. But I think even just the first few steps are kind of merging man and machine, but helping people who actually really need it. There are a lot of people who haven't had a real chance at having a life with a lot of things that we take for granted in our health and our bodies. So, for instance, look at Valery Spiridonov, the man who's the future recipient of the first human head transplant. So, had the technologies already existed for him to be able to upload his consciousness into a robot body, I'm very certain that he would go for that option rather than have a human head transplant, because it is very scary and risky, and there are a lot of uncertainties around that procedure.
So for those who don't know, this gentleman has unfortunately got a very sick body. His body's wasting away, and he thinks that it's only a matter of time before that body dies, and he has the opportunity potentially to have a head transplant onto a new body.
Correct, yes. So, and they are working very hard towards this, and they are making some progress, but I think that that just serves an example of the very many real people who would like to support the best option for people to kind of step away from their biological bodies and have another chance at life, or a better life rather, in a more complete, healthier body. So, and when I've spoken to Valery, this man we're talking about, and he's a very, very real person. He's a lovely person to talk to, very smart, very creative, and I wish him the best. I really do. I'm very curious to see how things go with the procedures, but of course, in the media, things are sensationalized, and there's a lot of fear out there about these things. But
just very quickly on this topic before we move to another panelist, I mean, did you talk to Valery about the possibility that the doctor who is promising to do this doesn't have the actual experience and credentials that he claims, and some people say he's a bit of a hoaxer? Yes,
that is a very big concern. Of course, Val has explored the different possibilities. However, for him, he says that he doesn't really have much time, and he doesn't really have another option. This is sort of the best option, but at the same time, Dr. Canavero, who's the main doctor, the neurosurgeon behind this project, he has been, he's definitely under a lot of pressure to prove that this is very feasible before they attempt this type of procedure on a living human such as Val.
So it might become like heart transplants. Initially, when people heard about the idea of a heart transplant, they said, yuck, that's horrible. What an incredibly strange idea to have somebody else's heart in my body. And now it's still a big thing, of course, but it's much more taken for granted. Maybe in the end, we'll have the similar views as to moving our heads from our current physical bodies onto some robots. Let's move on. Jonathan, what's your views, and what would you recommend as the next baby steps to be taken to increase the chance of this positive future?
Well, first of all, is it a head transplant or is it a body transplant? Because, I don't know. I feel like if that's in my head, that's a body transplant in my mind. But okay.
You're right. Yes, he keeps his head and he gets a new body.
So as far as increasing the positive outcome, I think the absolute most important thing is to try to get people aware of what's going on. I try to start a group called Futurize, and I would go around and talk to very educated, intelligent people in my community, and I'd be like, what do you think of the singularity? What do you think about artificial intelligence? and they have no clue. They've never heard of these things. They've never heard of Kurzweil. They've never heard of the singularity. There's just, this is all very familiar to us, but we're kind of in a bubble. We're in a super minority. And I think that's something that, I really experience every day, because I go out and I force myself to talk to people. And I live in Dallas, Texas. There's not a lot of futurists, or, in certain areas there are, but in the normal community, there's just, everyone's fundamentalist, religion, things like that. And so to even talk to these people, you have to kind of meet them halfway. You have to kind of merge science and spirituality, and kind of, I think that's one of the things I try to do in my book. I didn't say, look, everything you believe is wrong. I said, what if your thoughts in the afterlife, what if there's a scientific interpretation that kind of melds these ideas? And so when I would say to people, what if the light at the end of the tunnel is a technologically advanced future, it would kind of open their mind, and they would actually talk to me about it. And I think
this is when somebody's having a near-death experience and they think being in contact with Mother Mary or something, it might actually be a future superintelligence that's reaching out to them.
Yeah, kind of. I mean, it's always been about superintelligence. I mean, if you go back to the beginning of time, God is essentially superintelligence. That's what people think is the divine quality of being a human, is our intelligence. So superintelligence is holy. And then when we realized how the universe works, it became aliens. Aliens became the superintelligence that everybody wanted to meet to get like a shortcut. And now it's artificial intelligence. We're gonna make artificial superintelligence, and it's going to tell us all the answers. Well, at least in our community. But I think it's really important, because I think people, futurists especially, just dismiss billions of people. And these people have power, and they have a say in the way things are going to happen. As a global community, there are billions of Muslims, there are billions of fundamentalist Christians and things like that. So I think it's important for us to try to figure out how to get them motivated into these futurist ideas, because right now they're really not. That's the first step, I think.
Well, let's turn to Julia, if I may, because Julia, I think you're interested in the question of speaking to people with a spiritual inclination, rather than dismissing all of that as somehow superstitious and archaic. And before you speak, let me just throw out something to the whole audience. I know we've got several dozen people watching us currently, and I know some are dropping questions onto the YouTube chat window. I've been feeding some of the comments into the discussion as I'm going, and there's 2 or 3 others I want to feed in shortly. But please, if you are watching and there's something you want us to address, then drop a brief note into the live chat window on the side of YouTube. So, Giulio, maybe you want to tell us about Turing Church and some of the responses to other things we've been talking about in the last 5 minutes or so. Giulio.
I didn't even realize that you were speaking to me, because my internet connection has been working very bad in the last couple of minutes, and I hear your audio broken. So before continuing, can you confirm that you are hearing me okay?
We're hearing you. Thank you.
That's great. And can you just say again what you were asking me?
Addressing questions of spirituality from a transhumanist point of view. Is that a good or a bad idea?
The point I wanted to get at, but let me start with the aliens thing. The idea that somebody will resurrect us, and that somebody is an alien civilization. I had a very good friend. His name was Dan Massey. He left us a few years ago, who used to be persuaded that that is exactly what would happen. We would be resurrected by aliens who have mastered very advanced and weird quantum technologies to resurrect the dead. Another essentially similar idea is the simulation hypothesis. The idea that our world is a simulation running in some other dimensional reality. And Elon Musk is persuaded that that's exactly the case. And when somebody dies, the system operator who is running the simulation just makes a backup. And within this family of ideas, I would consider also traditional religion, which is very similar to the situation hypothesis. No, let me say that better. Religion is identical to the situation, to the simulation hypothesis, because in both cases we are saying exactly the same things. And then again, not a similar thing, exactly the same thing with different words. And I want to mention that I'm very open to all these possibilities. There can be benevolent alien civilization watching over us. There can be system operators in a different level of reality that run our own reality as a simulation. There can be a God. There can be one God. There can be many gods. There can be the Christian God. There can be some, like, the cosmic mind of the universe. Be more spirituality than religion. But I am very open to all these things. And in fact, I dedicate a lot of my time to speculating and thinking about how to make science and religion compatible. And as a matter of fact, the simulation hypothesis is a way to make science and religion compatible. It's not the only way. There are also other ways to make sense of religion and introduce the notion of a God by staying within one physical universe. Having said that, my focus is what happens in the worst case. Well, the worst case is that there is no alien civilization yet resurrecting everyone else in the universe. Our reality is not a simulation, and there is not a God yet. In this worst case scenario, what is it that we can do? And again, I want to underline that I consider technological resurrection, which means bringing back the people who have died in the past to the present or the future through some form of copying consciousness from the past to the future. It's physically possible. It will be achieved. Not tomorrow and not next week, but it will eventually be achieved. So I think this is the fourth way. Even if you don't or don't want to believe in the other three scenarios that I mentioned, namely aliens, simulation, or a God, that's something that we can do as a species. It's not a belief, it's in a project. It's something that we want to do. And I want to mention that I like very much when Jonathan, in the book, says that, well, it's all, it's we who have to make that happen. And in order to make that happen, we have to, study science and improve our technology, but also take better care of the planet and of each other to ensure that our civilization continues to develop in harmony until that day, in a few hundreds or a few thousands years, it doesn't even matter, where we will become a cosmic civilization able to resurrect the dead.
Thanks. Let's pick up a question that has just been posted online, which actually continues the discussion you've just raised, Giulio, which is, should we go sympathetic to transhumanism? Should those of us who think in these terms of a future technology is going to be very powerful and that it's a good thing, how should we be talking to those from a traditional religious point of view, such as Christians and Muslims? Should we be then doing as Giulio has been elaborating in terms of talking about resurrection and God, or is this whole thing possibly a dangerous route to follow, and that we'd be better off leaving all that discussion altogether and sticking with more scientific and indeed political minds?
Since I have the microphone still on, you wanted to say something, Alexei?
Yeah, because I think the question is for me or for...
Well, maybe you can all answer it in due course, but if you're quick, Giulio, you can briefly answer, and then I'll hand over to Alexei.
Okay.
Giulio, you can answer quickly.
Okay, so to the point where how should we be talking to religions? My simple answer is with respect and with understanding. I don't have to make a list here of all the famous scientists and Nobel Prize winners who were also devout believers. I'm just using this example to stress then being a believer is not a disease. It's not something that you have to be saved from. It's a choice that many extremely smart people, much smarter than me at least, make. So that I think the dialogue with religion should be based on mutual understanding and enrichment, and that's what I try to do myself, finding compatibilities between science and religion as perhaps different ways to say exactly the same things.
Alexei, so you heard the recommendation there. We should be talking to religious people with respect and understanding. Is that a priority for you?
Yeah, I think that we should respect other people, because if we challenge the belief, they will even stronger be attracted to this set of beliefs. So what I suggest to do is to try to explain that Jesus Christ was a first transhumanist by the fact. So he was first who was resurrected. He was resurrected physically on our world 3 days after he died, and this is exactly the idea which inspired early Christians. So they really wanted a physical resurrection. They strongly believed that it is possible, and they even use some type of rational arguments that if Christ could be resurrected, then other people could be resurrected. So it was some kind of logical from the point of view. And they tried to preserve bodies. So they was first who decided that the bodies should be preserved. And they started to preserve in Roman catacomb. And later the burial happened inside the church under the floor. So, and all it was done because they believed that the same bodies could be resurrected, and this belief survived until 18th century after the Enlightenment in France, and science proved that the bodies in the church create germs and create illnesses for the people inside the church. So they started to bury people underground, and so not in churches. So basically, if we explain that we want similar things, but we have just different approaches, and it could be starting point to mutual respect and working together. And even Pope of Rome is quite progressive now. They give Catholic Church give money on scientific research in astronomy, in biology, in ecology, and maybe even they later could give money on scientific research in fighting aging, if we explain that fighting aging is important to prevent human sufferings. So I think that so by demonstrating this connection of religious ideas and early transhumanist thinking, we could find some friends.
Right. Katie, do you agree with that assessment? Is this a priority for you to build these bridges, or do you think we have easier things we can be focusing on the short term?
I think we have to build these bridges, because I mean, I have personal experience from the lack of communication between, let's say, the general public, particularly religious, let's say, like Christians, for example. I have been somewhat of a Christian my whole life, and I went to Catholic school and for majority of my school life. So I am very familiar with religion in that way. But however, you know, as I got older, it was not something that was typically on my mind. I've always been spiritual, but it wasn't something that I was actively practicing in the traditional way. Now, I've always been passionate about the future and technology, obviously, and now in my adult life, that has been the forefront of my mind. But things have taken a turn where I did experience the negative consequences of being involved with transhumanism because of religion. There is a huge growing community of people who identify themselves as truthers. And these people do talk about very interesting things, of course, and that's all well and good. But when it comes to transhumanism, they believe that transhumanism is the end-all be-all of, let's say, the New World Order. And it sounds, you know, everyone has their own beliefs on things like this. It sounds crazy, sounds like conspiracies. But whether people want to acknowledge that in the community or not, it's a real thing and it's growing. And by the transhumanist community just staying in the bubble and saying, oh, we won't talk about religion because our goal isn't to have religion involved with what we're doing. We have to promote science, put science first. And the thing is that really doesn't work, because there's more people who are religious and who have a lot of fear, and there are a lot of things that need to be talked about between both communities. I think that there are people who are searching for answers, especially with all the circumstances going on in the world, and a lot of those, a lot of the searching brings you to these topics, and that gives transhumanism a very negative light. It's actually making transhumanism as evil as can be. I mean, to control humanity, to have them upload into bodies where they will have no control over themselves and things like that. There's a lot of fear. It has to be talked about. So I was saying I had personal experience because a couple of years ago I had my own YouTube channel. It was doing very, very well. I was very happy. It was called Awesome Future TV. And then one day I woke up and I started receiving tons of hate comments. And I didn't know what was happening, where it was coming from. And because I was associated with Humanoid, the startup, and my last name was Aquino, which was my married name at the time, well, there is apparently some Satanist whose last name is Aquino, and they just assumed that I'm this person's daughter. And because I'm a transhumanist and my last name was Aquino, that was the connection I guess they made. And next thing you know, I was receiving tons and tons and tons of hate comments. I received strikes against my YouTube account. My YouTube videos were taken down. And I tried posting an open letter on one of the videos saying, oh, I'll show you my parents' birth certificates. That's not my parents. You know, this is completely false. And I'm happy to talk to you about what the transhumanist community is actually like and what they're really working on and what technology is really like today. And it doesn't matter. It's just in one ear and out the other. So I think there is somewhat of a responsibility of the transhumanist community to acknowledge what the rest of the world is thinking outside of the bubble, rather than you know, just keep on focusing on science and what we want to do.
So when I hear this kind of story, of course, it's disturbing from a personal point of view. My inclination would be, oh, let's just not talk to these people at all. Let's get on with people who are more useful to have discussions with.
I I do think that that could be a common response amongst the transhumanist community. But however, my personal initiative in 2018 is to relaunch my YouTube channel, and it's going to be a commentary channel where I'll be talking about these subjects, and I will be inviting fellow transhumanists and futurists in to talk about these things, because no, I don't think that every futurist or transhumanist should be going out there and making it known, you know, what we're about and what we're working on in that space. But I think that there should be some people doing it. I think that Jonathan's doing a good job as well by creating his stories and exploring these topics. I think that him and I are very similar in that regard, and seeing both worlds and thinking that there could be work to be done.
So Jonathan, what kind of response are you getting? I mean, are you getting fan mail, hate mail? Has the experience led you to rethink how you want to continue your public outreach work?
Yeah, so as I told you earlier, I really haven't, Julio really started promoting the book more than me, and then I guess he informed you about it. I really haven't promoted it that much because I am being very careful. Most of my family is like, not, at least half of my family is very Christian. I was kind of in the closet about my beliefs because of this kid was saying these responses. So I'm trying to feel my way forward. But I think it's like Alexei said, we all really want the same thing. I think that's what's interesting, is if you look at where transhumanism and futurism and all these things are going in religion, they end up kind of sounding kind of similar. We all want to live in kind of like a place that kind of sounds like heaven, right? We all want to be free of disease and be young and immortal. We want to see our friends. Ray Kurzweil, you know, he wants to see his father in some form or fashion. And I think that's what we need to focus, is what we have in common, which is a kind of a utopian ideal. And as Julia was saying, I think the simulation theory of religions, all religions are simulation theory, is kind of a problem. I mean, people don't care about the environment as much. They don't care about, well, what if aliens do show up and attack? You know, what if a meteor hits us? They don't care about these things because they think that they're going to go to an alternate reality, or God's got it handled. So I think that coming to these people and saying, look, you want to go to heaven, you want to live in heaven, so do we. So you can have your beliefs, but while you're relying on God to take care of you, why not, you know, while we're down here on Earth, why don't we just go ahead and try to make Earth kind of like a heaven-like place too? You know, like, why not? There's no reason not to. I mean, we're here, so I think that's a really good tactic. I think that if we go forward and kind of explain that we have such a positive intention, and you know, give people a positive incentive, that in my experience, they have been more open-minded and they are willing to listen.
So is it just a matter that we need to talk to people more, or are there something more fundamental as to why people aren't doing more to take care of their health and to prepare for the options of their long-term rejuvenation or resurrection?
Because in their mind, there is no long term. I mean, when I talk to people, a lot of them have, you know, diseases. They don't have money. They're just living in the moment, you know, struggling. And so when you're talking like, oh, in 100 years, you know, we'll have AI and this and that, they're like, okay, what does it have to do with me? I'm gonna die. I might die tomorrow. My children might starve tomorrow. So I'm gonna do whatever I have to. And I'm not even gonna think about the far off future. So I think that's the problem, is we're talking about you know, as everybody here agrees, this technology is, I mean, even if we have AI in the next 20 years, right? It's all gonna take a lot of time. That's like the best case scenario. So when we're talking to people about this stuff, they're just really not interested. I find that most futurists probably have a little more money than average, a little more free time than average. They probably, you know, a lot of futurists write their own books. They have companies. They, you know, like you, David, they've had a lot of success in life, and they've been the smartest person in a big room. So it's kind of a unique mind that is attracted to these. We can sit in our chairs by the fireplace and drink our coffee. When you talk to 9 out of 10 people, they're working 2 jobs to pay the bills. So we have to kind of give them a utopian incentive and say, this could be sooner. Let's get together and make the world a better place now.
So we're approaching the end of the session. We've got time, I think, for one more round of comments from each of the panelists. I will feed in if there are new urgent questions popping up on the live chat window. But in this last round of main round, maybe you can each give me your considered views. What are the most important takeaways from this, or what are the most important things that haven't been said yet that should be added to the table? So, Giulio, can I bring you in?
Something that hasn't been added to the table about the book. That's what you want to hear, isn't it? Let me think. Yes, it's well, I have already said that I like the book because it's simple. It's very simple and very easy to read. Now, some people could say that perhaps the book is too simple and too easy to read. Some people could say that the book is naive. Some people could say that the book doesn't have enough advanced physics or theology or philosophy in it. That's well, that's not wrong. The book is naive, but as I said, I like the book because it's naive. Now, this is also, I think, one of the very few books dedicated to the idea of technological resurrection. However, the same idea are kind of scattered in an existing literature of philosophical and scientific and theological texts. And the author of these books, of course, they make their best effort not to sound naive. They use very big words, you know, these words that you cannot even pronounce, let alone understand. So they want to sound intellectual, you know, they want to sound scholarly, learn intelligent. That's what they want to sound, intelligent. Now, if I were to write a book, well, as a matter of fact, I am writing a book. I have been writing it for some time, and I hope it will be finished before summertime.
What's the book going to be called?
Is called Tales of the Turing Church.
Tales of the Turing Church. And the Turing Church is an organization that you manage.
Yeah, it's a study group on the intersections of science, religion, and technology. And now, what my book is about is exactly the same thing that Jonathan's book is about, which is the idea, the prospect of technological resurrection. And I'm going much deeper into standard academic philosophy and theology and physics. I am a theoretical physicist by training, and that's why I'm going to talk a lot about physics.
You used to be at CERN, didn't you?
I used to be at CERN as well, also at European Space Agency, universities, and similar places. Now, is my book also naive? My answer is, of course, it is naive. I think whatever we can say at this moment about what kind of science or what kind of philosophy will be required by the future technology of resurrection, whatever we can say right now is naive. We just don't know enough. We have to find out. Now, Alexei mentioned a name which has to be mentioned in this context, which is Nikolai Fyodorov. And also Jonathan describes his work in the book. Now, what Fyodorov said was extremely inspiring. He was talking about the possibility, not only the possibility, our duty as a species to resurrect all the dead from the past. That was inspiring. Now, how did he think future scientists would do that? His ideas were basically that of going around in the universe to find all the molecules and all the atoms that form the part of the body of a dead person and put all this material back together to recreate the original. Now, this sounds very naive to us today. We want to hear about quantum entanglement from the past to the future. We want to hear, are you guys still listening to me?
Yes.
Because I have seen, okay. We want to hear words that sound contemporary. We want to hear entanglement, we want to hear wormholes, we want to hear things that sound like Star Trek. You know, the thing is, from the point of view of future scientists, the ideas that we are developing now will sound as naive as the idea that Fyodorov developed 100 years ago. And the content that I'm trying to put in my book will sound as naive as the content of Jonathan's book may sound. Now, what's the point I'm trying to get at?
Step-by-step improvements. We're getting to a better understanding, and we might invite you back onto a London Futurist hangout later this year once your book is ready. And then maybe there'll be another book in another year's time, which gradually brings our understanding more towards the future in terms of a greater understanding of whatever the new quantum.
A little bit more, little step by little step. We are not very close to understanding these things. We are still far.
Thanks, Giulio. Alexei, what's your final remarks in terms of things you want to highlight that we haven't focused enough on so far?
I think that we have stopped to be naive, and it's time to take real steps to the technological resurrection. And basically, there is only one step that most people could take now, because cryonics is very expensive, you know, and so even Julian stopped to pay fees. So the only cheap option which increases probability of your technological resurrection is digital immortality. That is recording of everything you do and also running some tests to collect as much information about yourself as possible. And you can do it almost for free. You can record everything on your computer, and plus you can write down some stories about yourself, like memoir. So, and you can elements of your DNA, like a hair, and it will provide enormous amount of useful information for the future AI, which will resurrect you, and it will be resurrect you earlier, which is important, because of course maybe everybody will be finally resurrected, but it is much better to be resurrected earlier and resurrected in high quality without mistakes. So I think that we should encourage ourselves and people and other people to try digital immortality, because it is first practical step which you can do, which will make difference between just theoretical discussions and practical work for immortality, for resurrection.
So taking part in online YouTube Hangouts on Air is a small contribution towards expanding our digital footprint?
Yeah.
All right. Katie, what have you heard? What would you like to add in that hasn't been properly highlighted yet?
Well, I think the two main points to take away from our discussion today, in my own thoughts, would be two things: education, excuse me, and decentralization. I think that we need to educate the public more about what is actually happening right now within the transhumanist and futurist communities. And also, decentralization is a hot topic. People have readily accepted that cryptocurrencies are here and they're here to stay. If we could start looking at emerging technologies in futurism, transhumanism, as being a decentralized, empowering thing rather than a cryptic, misunderstood, fearful, dystopian possibility, I think that will be a huge win for everybody, because nobody wants to fear that there are some people in a basement somewhere turning into super soldier cyborgs that are going to control humanity. I mean, that's what people actually think out there, because they don't know anything about it. They've never met a transhumanist. And like Jonathan said before, most people are working 2 jobs, and they go on the internet and they go on YouTube, and they're watching these videos, and they're breaking it down in ways that even people who are in the transhumanist community can't look at it as. It's very there's a very big disconnect. So it is our duty to move humanity away from this fetishization of transhumanism and towards a more united, decentralized future that's for everybody. Cyborgs already exist. It's already here. So.
And you're optimistic about decentralization in terms of whether blockchain is super hyped or super real? What's your estimate?
I think it is super real. It is super hyped as well, but I think it's a good thing. It's what the masses want. People want to kind of take the power back in a way through these emerging technologies, and just look at how it's caught on. It's become a craze. So if we can look at emerging technologies in this transhumanist space like that in the future, I think it'll also catch on too.
Well, hang on to that thought. We probably will have time for one more round after this, and the next round of questions will be, what would you like to see a future London Futurists video hangout on there addressing, if not just technological resurrection? What other topics do you think are most deserving further public outreach? But before that, let's come back to Jonathan. What would your final main comments be in terms of what else you'd like to highlight? And by the way, I do know that in your book you cover not just the kind of philosophical, theoretical stuff. You've also got a fascinating section on other films and science fiction that in various ways address this already. So that's a great resource as well in terms of people exploring these ideas from different perspectives.
Yeah, so 3 things, as Katie was talking about, are people in their basements trying to become super soldiers. I know a couple of guys doing the self-CRISPR techniques, trying to remove their myostatin, so like Rich Lee, people like that. As far as my book and technological resurrection, 2 things. As Alexei was saying, what's the cheapest thing we could do right now? We could just basically do this, create a digital footprint. Like people I talk to, I'm like, hey, if it ever happens, then hopefully, since I wrote this book on technological resurrection, they'll be like, yeah, we might as well resurrect that guy, you know? So like maybe I'm covered, right? But other people, they could essentially, like, if Google had an option, like, do you want to be resurrected in the future? They could just sign up, and then if they died like 100 years from now, that information could be used to find them and resurrect them. And the other thing I want to talk about is, like, so my book was designed for mass media, and I literally removed as many big words as I could. I tried to take all the science out. I had 1 chapter where I talked about 2 timeline problems, things like that. And even then, I was like, oh man, I don't know if I should even put that in there. But as far as being naive, I also took out, so the positive incentives for technological resurrection are obvious. You want to die, you go to heaven. The negative incentives are, and the negative consequences, I think you mentioned that to me, you were like, you didn't really talk about the negatives. Well, I had a bunch of chapters about all the negatives, but man, people did not, they hated them. So I didn't want to, put a poison pill in the book. And so I had like a short story called Do Not Resurrect, where essentially a woman, she would die and she would keep getting resurrected by this like stalker who had her, I know it's like really dark, I know, but I was just trying to show, like, it might be like an arms race. Like, if we don't think about it now, if we don't think about resurrection, if we don't figure out what we want to do with this, then maybe in the future some people or some super intelligence that we don't like will resurrect us in a world that we don't want to be in, and we won't have much say in it. And the last thing I'll say is, as far as, I don't know if you want me to go ahead and say what I think about what futurist hangouts we should talk about. Okay. So I'm actually writing a lot of short stories right now because I think there's an incredible amount of topics that just aren't discussed. Foremost among them, I don't know if you've done a hangout on mind reading.
Mind reading in what sense? By using headsets to read what's in the mind?
Just any sense at all, any sense at all. I think that mind reading technology it's kind of scary how advanced it already is. and we know it's going to be pretty advanced in 10 years, and I think that's going to just absolutely just alter everything about society.
Well, that might be an answer to questions that people have been raising on the chat. They're saying this digital immortality won't work because actually we think a heck of a lot more than we say or write. So if anything just captures what we say or write, they're not getting anything close to our essence, and it's going to be a very shallow replication of us.
Right.
If there were mind-reading technologies, maybe then we'd be recorded much more faithfully, and that would accelerate and improve digital
yeah, so in my book, I talked about quantum archaeology, and in a different way, I said, well, theoretically in the future, using quantum entanglement, which, you know, if you Google quantum entanglement in time, things like that, these ideas are already being explored by real scientists. They'll be able to essentially look back in the past, and, you know, in my mind, I think it's important to actually have some kind of transference or something, an actual continuation of consciousness. But they will certainly be able to get all the information about your thoughts and your brain, all your memories, which are just, you know, physical constructs in your brain. As far as other topics to talk about, there's so many. Like, I think that I was talking to my friends about electronic sniffers. I said, put one giant electronic sniffer in an apartment complex, right? And then anybody doing any kind of illegal drugs or having illegal chemicals, it'll be able to detect that. That'll be an ultimate surveillance tool. Exoskeletons
scary
that
as
can
well
walk
as
around.
promising. Anybody who's thinking illegal thoughts, as defined by our corporate masters, might be in trouble as a result. Anyway.
Well, yeah. So anyway, I just want to point out there's so many things that just aren't being talked about that are going to completely change our society. I think those might be some good topics.
I think we've time for a quick 30 seconds from everybody on one other topic question that's popped in, which is, isn't this stuff going to be incredibly expensive? Don't we risk the possibility that only the very rich and well off are going to be able to be digitally resurrected? Anybody want to chip in with 30 seconds of comments on that? Katie.
Okay, so yes, that's where the decentralization comes in. I mean, if people are creating ICOs or, you know, cryptocurrencies for just about anything. I mean, there was a Jesus coin out there. You know, there's all kinds of different cryptocurrencies and things going on right now. So if we start taking those technologies and looking at it as saying, all right, so let's say cryonics or, you know, something like that, you could get people more involved in small micro ways, you know, and work together so that these are for everybody. And there are a lot of ways that we can start decentralizing these technologies so it's more realistic for people to get involved, whereas it seems like a far off dream to be paying, let's say, thousands of dollars a year to have a cryonics facility you never use. So
you're giving another vote for discussing a decentralization in a future event. Anybody else want to chip in on the affordability and the potential mass inequality question?
Maybe I will tell that in Russian cryo-rules, you don't have to pay fees every year. So, and if you're based in Europe, you may sign for cryo-rules. And also the organizer of Russian cryo-rules, Valerie Pride, is now in Italy. She's traveling a lot. So I have the cryo-rules contract, and it's based in Moscow, so it's cheaper and you don't need to pay fees, but maybe it is not as reliable as our course, but it is still better than nothing.
Right. So thanks, everybody. Let me just draw attention to a couple of things as I close down this hangout. There is a lot of information online about many of the topics we've discussed in H+pedia. H+pedia.org is a site that is collecting lots of information about all matters futurist, transhumanist. If you look there, you may discover useful information on topic of your interest. From time to time, you'll also notice holes and gaps, and you may realize that you have more information available than is already on that site. Well, please then get involved and take part in that. You'll be very welcome to help share the knowledge of practical positive transhumanism with more and more people. Secondly, let me mention that some of the topics we've been discussing today in this hangout, namely the possible long-term evolution of human life, consciousness in the universe, the eventual powers and capabilities that can be achieved in some timescales that we can hardly even imagine. They'll be addressed at a London Futurist event at Birkbeck College on Saturday, the 3rd of February. That's what, 13 days' time, by Anders Sandberg, who was one of the first public transhumanists who, from 1990s onwards, has been writing on his website his ideas on matters such as the grand future, the possibilities to enhance human experience physically, mentally, socially, and also talking about the risks and the obstacles and potential disasters that await us between now and then. So he's going to be giving on the Saturday, the 3rd of February, his own views at this London Futurist event. I encourage many of you to take part. If you can't join us, we will be recording it and you'll be able to watch the recording later. So thanks to all the panelists, excuse me. Thanks to all the panelists and thanks to all the audience. You've made this a great collaborative discussion, and London Futurists will be doing more of these as 2018 unveils. Thanks, everybody, and goodbye.